After Nicholas cheated, I didn't mention divorce. Instead, I continued to act as usual and stayed affectionate with him for another 2 years. It wasn't until I discovered I was pregnant that I finally handed him divorce papers. He refused. But I was already wealthy, truly no longer needed to endure such mistreatment. When Nicholas returned, it was already past midnight. He was still impeccably dressed in his suit, his tie perfectly knotted, as if he had just stepped out of an important meeting. "Darling, why aren't you asleep yet?" He approached, taking my hand in his palm warm. "Didn't I tell you not to wait up when I'm working late?" The crisp scent of shower gel wafted from him, as if deliberately washing away traces of something. I couldn't help thinking that Nicholas was indeed a perfectionist, even needing to bathe and change clothes just for working overtime. I withdrew my hand and pushed the pregnancy test report in front of him. "I'm pregnant, 12 weeks. The air suddenly froze. Nicholas's body visibly stiffened. His pupils constricted sharply, his fingers unconsciously clenching and unclenching, his knuckles turning white, the veins at his temples clearly visible. In the dim light, I could hear his breathing suddenly grow heavier, watching his Adam's apple bob up and down once, twice. He looked at me, then the next second, slammed himself down onto the sofa. "You hit me, fine, I won't hold it against you." What man wouldn't hold it against his wife for cheating? Unless he had wronged her first. I met his gaze steadily, voice calm. "The child is yours." His head jerked up, a cold smirk twisting his lips. "These past 2 years, you've always made me use protection, and we haven't been intimate as a couple for half a year. Now you're telling me the baby is mine? Bianca. Do you really think I'm that easy to fool? Believe it or not, it's up to you." I slowly sat up straight, placing a hand on my abdomen. Nicholas's expression instantly froze. His eyes widened, filled with a complex mix of emotions I had never seen before. Shock, confusion, and a barely detectable flicker of elation. "When did this?" "Yvette is 42 days pregnant, when you took her to the hospital for the checkup." My voice remained steady. Nicholas's face instantly turned ashen, as if he had been stabbed in the chest. His lips trembled, and his fingers unconsciously tightened their grip on the armrest of the sofa. "How, do you know?" His voice was so soft it was almost inaudible. "I not only knew she was pregnant, but also that you two have been together for 2 years. Nicholas took off his suit jacket, roughly loosened his tie, and lit a cigarette. The flame from the lighter flickered in his trembling hand, illuminating the cold sweat on his temples. "No wonder," he exhaled a smoke ring, his voice low. "You suddenly started insisting on protection." He looked up at me with the wariness of a wounded beast in his eyes. "Back then, when you found out, why didn't you say anything? And since you've endured it for 2 years, why not just keep enduring?" Gently caressing my still flat abdomen, I felt the tiny life growing within. "I was waiting for you to grow tired." My voice finally trembled slightly. "But then came the news of Yvette's pregnancy, so I thought it was time for me to leave." The sound of a cigarette being forcefully extinguished in the ashtray echoed. Nicholas's lips trembled. "I'll handle Yvette, and she won't be allowed to have the child." "I apologize. Now that you're pregnant, I'll take good care of you and our child." I pulled out the folder I had prepared long ago from under the couch cushion and pushed it toward him. "Sign it, Nicholas. Let's part on good terms." As he flipped open the folder and saw the words "divorce agreement," his fingers jerked suddenly. "You know I'm an orphan," my fingertips lightly traced over the ultrasound image on the pregnancy report. "The baby in my womb is the only blood relative I have. Getting pregnant with him was my way of forcing myself to make a clean break with you." I raised my head and looked him straight in the eyes. "I don't want to lose him." Nicholas stared at me, his eyes reddening, his voice hoarse. "Bianca, are you saying that if I don't divorce you, you'll abort this child?" I nodded, carrying him while thinking about your 2 years of betrayal. I couldn't find any reason to convince myself to keep him. But I couldn't bear to let him go either. I paused. "Once the divorce is finalized, he will belong only to me, and I won't have to constantly wonder whether my husband went to see Yvette again today." My gaze fell once more on his open collar. For example, today, despite working overtime, you still had time to take a shower. I couldn't help but think, did you just come back from Yvette's place? Did you wash yourself deliberately to avoid raising suspicion? Nicholas turned even paler and instinctively raised his hand to cover that mark. I stood up and looked down at him. I don't want to become a resentful housewife, and I still want to leave good memories in your heart, so I think it's better for us to separate. The living room fell into dead silence, with only Nicholas's rapid breathing audible. The moonlight had shifted, now illuminating the divorce agreement, black words on white paper, glaringly clear. At last he spoke, his voice as if coming from a faraway place. Give me some time, let me think. I turned and walked toward the bedroom. 3 days. I want your answer in 3 days. Shutting the bedroom door behind me, I didn't turn on the light and simply lay down on the bed. In the darkness, tears silently streamed down. Outside the door came the sound of a glass shattering, followed by the loud slam of a door. I caressed my abdomen and whispered, Nicholas, don't blame me. You betrayed me first. Between Nicholas and me lies not just a gap, but the distance of an entire world. I was a child raised in an orphanage, even my name was casually taken from a hair dye package by the director we called Mom. As for Nicholas, on the day he was born, Chean Company Group stock price hit the limit up directly. The LED screens across the city were all broadcasting the message, congratulations to Chean Company Group on the joyous occasion of welcoming their precious son. In my freshman year, when he pursued me, I thought it was just a rich second-generation heir amusing himself out of boredom. The designer bags he gave me, I returned untouched. The love letters? I tossed them straight into the trash without a second glance. That was until the stormy night when I was working the late shift at the convenience store. He barged in looking like a drowned rat, slamming the black card on the counter. I'll pay for 3 hours of your time, just to eat instant noodles. Looking at his bloodshot eyes, I realized even those born with a silver spoon in their mouth could cry. I only found out later that it was the 10th anniversary of his mother's death. Why me? I asked him after we started dating, sitting in the Michelin-starred restaurant he booked. His hand paused while cutting the steak. Because when you look at me, there's no flattering gleam in your eyes like there is in theirs. I lowered my head to take a sip of red wine, hiding the bitter smile at the corner of my lips behind the rim of the glass. He would never know that the absence of light in my eyes was because I had seen through everything long ago. Love is merely a transaction of equal exchange. Since it must be sold, it might as well be sold to the highest bidder. Nicholas thought what moved me were his handwritten letters every day for 3 consecutive years, and the arranged marriage he gave up for me. But the truth is, I just did the math. With him, I could move from a basement apartment to a penthouse, and ensure the children at the orphanage got new uniforms. That night in the hotel suite, as he devotedly kissed my collarbone, I was counting the facets of the crystal chandelier on the ceiling. As he tenderly called my name, I was calculating whether to open a separate account at a Swiss bank tomorrow. On the night of his proposal, he knelt on one knee on the yacht deck strewn with rose petals, holding up a 3-carat pink diamond ring. The sea breeze tousled his hair, and as I stared at his trembling fingers, I thought. The contracts signed by this hand were valuable enough to rebuild countless welfare institutions. The media widely reported the fairy tale of Cinderella marrying into a wealthy family. Only I knew that I was merely a shrewd businesswoman, turning marriage into the most cost-effective long-term investment. The night before the wedding, Mother Superior cried, fearing I would be at a disadvantage. I smiled and wiped away her tears, thinking to myself, how could I possibly be the one to lose out? I didn't even bring my heart into this marriage. No matter how devoted Nicholas was, he was merely performing for an empty shell. In the first year of marriage, I learned to distinguish the origin and vintage of caviar. By the second year, I had earned an EMBA degree from business school. In the spring of the third year, I found a streak of rose-colored lipstick on the collar of a shirt he had changed out of, not the muted shade I usually wore. As I applied lipstick in front of the bathroom mirror, I suddenly noticed the figure in the reflection was trembling. Me, the master of calculation, was actually shedding tears over a man. That day I dried my tears, touched up my makeup, and put on my most expensive business suit. The car stopped in front of the company building, and I looked up at the office tower he had bought for me. The sunlight reflecting off the glass curtain wall made my eyes sting, but I didn't let myself shed any more tears. Bianca. Jessie at the front desk greeted me respectfully. I smiled and nodded, stepping into the private elevator in my custom-made high heels. Turning around, I signed a 9-figure deal in my capacity as Mrs. Nicholas. Over the past 2 years, I've been gentle and considerate, providing him with all the emotional support he needed. And in these same 2 years, my business empire no longer needed the prestige of Chain Company Group. When you become the elite yourself, those acts of swallowing your pride can finally take their final bow. Saying I waited for him to come back was a lie. I just wanted him to feel even more guilty so I could gain even more. Look, even getting divorced is something I'm calculating. I thought Nicholas didn't love me anymore, so parting ways should have been easy. Yet 3 days passed, and Nicholas didn't come home nor respond to any of my messages. I called his executive assistant. The phone rang for a long time before it was finally answered. Madam, Nicholas is currently in a board meeting. Once it concludes, I'll inform him to call you back immediately. I hung up the phone and buried myself in work. When I finally looked up, it was already 3 p.m., and my phone screen remained dark the whole time. The sunlight outside was so glaring it made me want to cry. I put on my sunglasses and drove to Chain Company Group. Good afternoon, madam. Good afternoon, madam. Everyone in the company greeted me respectfully, and I responded with a smiling nod, perfectly composed, just as always. No one would have expected that this madam was in the midst of divorcing their CEO. Pushing open the door to the CEO's office, Nicholas. Before the words could fully leave my lips, I turned away. My nails dug deep into my palms, suppressing the sharp pain in my chest. At that moment, Yvette coiled around Nicholas like a white snake, her silk blouse unbuttoned down to the 3rd button, exposing vast stretches of pale skin. Nicholas wore a cold expression, but his hand still rested at her waist. Sorry to disturb you. My voice remained surprisingly calm. Nicholas abruptly pushed Yvette aside and rushed after me, grabbing my wrist. Bianca, let me explain. Feeling the curious gazes of the surrounding employees, I didn't want to make a scene. Making a friend is always better than creating an enemy. Besides, he's the father of the baby I'm carrying. Let's talk in the office. Yvette was still fumbling with her buttons in panic. The more she hurried, the more they refused to fasten, revealing ambiguous red marks on her neck. She looked at Nicholas pleadingly, her eyes brimming with tears. Nicholas's voice was as cold as ice. Get out. Hand in your resignation yourself, and don't let me see you again. I'm pregnant with your child. Take care of it. Don't make me repeat myself. You'll regret this. Yvette turned deathly pale, her eyes red as she fled in panic. When only the 2 of us remained in the office. Rubbing his temples wearily, he said, 2 years ago, I was drugged. She helped me. So it took 2 years of nonstop detoxing? I lightly touched my stomach, cutting him off sarcastically. Or was it repaying her sacrifice with your body? Bianca, he reached out to touch me. I'll give you whatever you want. Money, shares, property. I took a step back. I want freedom. Nicholas, can you give it to me? Outside the window, the dusk deepened, making his bloodshot eyes particularly clear. He suddenly pulled me into his arms, his warm lips brushing against my earlobe. Not a chance. I was just confused for a moment. I won't let her keep the baby. I'll end things with her, and we can start over. I stroked my belly and interrupted. Do you know that unstable emotions in a pregnant woman can affect fetal development? I don't want my child to suffer any negative influences. If you ever truly loved me, let me go. Leaving Nicholas's office, I bumped into Yvette, who had been waiting for a long time. Humph, what are you so smug about? She blocked my path, her voice dripping with smugness. Nicholas was just putting on an act for you by scolding me earlier. He'd never actually fire me, how could he bear to? I couldn't even be bothered to give her a glance, walking straight past her. The woman's perfume was giving me a headache. Yvette lowered her voice. He said he loves me. He said he's long grown tired of you, you're like mosquito blood smeared on the wall, like leftover grains of rice in a bowl. I paused mid-step and slowly turned around. She immediately stroked her belly smugly. He also said, he's especially looking forward to the birth of our child. Unlike you, who couldn't even produce a single. Then I wish Yvette a speedy birth and all her dreams come true. I cut her off with a smile. She suddenly faltered. Bianca, how can you be so shameless? Didn't you see those photos? Your husband stopped loving you long ago. How can you tolerate watching your own husband sleep with another woman? Don't you have any dignity? I curled my lips contemptuously. Yvette, a mistress being too arrogant in front of the lawful wife never ends well. Watching her face instantly turn pale, I elegantly pressed the elevator button. As the doors closed, I could still hear her muffled cursing. In the back seat of the Rolls-Royce, I gazed at the fleeting neon lights outside the window and suddenly found it all ridiculous. That girl working night shifts at the convenience store back then, how could she have imagined one day she'd be bothered by such matters? Ironically, Nicholas truly seemed like a lovesick fool when he was pursuing me back then. Young Master Nicholas, he queued for an hour in the freezing cold just to eat mala tang with me at the school gate. I remember him shivering uncontrollably, yet still grinning foolishly as he pushed the only cup of hot milk tea into my hands. I'll be good to you for the rest of my life, Bianca. That's what he said back then. But he never said I'll only be good to you. So his change of heart was only natural. Though in their circle, Nicholas could indeed be considered a model husband. At least he remembers to come home to keep up appearances and post on social media for every anniversary. Valentine's Day always brings 999 roses, birthdays are never without a Cartier gift, and anniversaries are guaranteed with cancelled meetings for island getaways. Those society ladies always put on their phony airs and say, Bianca, you must have accumulated 8 lifetimes of good karma to marry a man like Nicholas. I always play along with a demure smile. Yes, I count my blessings every day. But no one knew, what I'd dreamed of in college was just marrying an ordinary office worker. We squeezed onto the subway together every day and binge-watched shows in our rented apartment on weekends. It was Nicholas who introduced me to the world of extravagance, making me abandon my original aspirations. The day I discovered his infidelity, I actually felt a sense of relief, like it finally happened. So I only allowed myself 1 minute to grieve. Then I just touched up my makeup in the mirror and went straight to sign a 9-figure contract. After all, love may spoil, but a bank account never betrays. As the car entered the villa complex, my phone vibrated. A multimedia message from an unknown number arrived. Nicholas was holding a sobbing Yvette in his arms, whispering comfort. I chuckled mockingly. Nicholas had done impeccable work covering his tracks. But the moment I saw that lipstick mark, I sent someone to investigate, only to find nothing. Shame for all his efforts, he couldn't stop the mistress from being eager to claim her place. Over the past 2 years, this number has sent me no fewer than 100 intimate photos, from hotels to offices, in every imaginable scenario. True enough, what kind of qualified mistress doesn't dream of becoming the official wife? I could easily use these photos to force Nicholas into a divorce. But then again, the luxury mansion I live in, the high-end cars I drive, the high-status perks that make everyone fawn over me, which of these wasn't bestowed upon me by him? One mustn't be too ungrateful. However, if he insists on clinging on relentlessly, I wouldn't mind showing him just how sharp this little songbird's claws can be. When Nicholas pushed open the door, I was leaning against the floor-to-ceiling window, gazing at the night view. He was impeccably dressed in a suit, yet carried a convenience store plastic bag with 2 packs of instant noodles inside. Bianca, I'm back, he said softly, casually tossing my phone into the fish tank as bubbles gurgled upward. Next came the tablet, the laptop, sinking one by one to the bottom of the fish tank. I quietly watched the ripples on the water surface. Are you trying to imprison me? He slowly loosened his tie, his gaze terrifyingly gentle. I just didn't want meaningless things or irrelevant people to disturb us. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the sheer curtains into the kitchen. Nicholas, wearing an apron, was boiling instant noodles. The brand was the same as what I treated him to at the convenience store that day. "Try it," he said, presenting a bowl like a treasure, his eyes sparkling with anticipation. I took the bowl and ate slowly, bite by bite. The noodles were overcooked, the broth was scant, and it was unbearably salty, yet somehow, it made my eyes sting with warmth. He watched with satisfaction as I finished the last bite, wearing that smile I once knew so well. On the third day, he somehow managed to find a rusty bicycle. On the fourth day, even with his suit jacket cushioning the back seat, it still felt painfully uncomfortable. He rode slowly, afraid of jostling me. "Hold tight," he said against the wind, his voice full of laughter. I wrapped my arms around his waist and pressed my face against his back. His white shirt carried the scent of sunlight, yet it was different from the one in my memories. On the fourth night, a projector was set up in the living room. He pulled out that old movie DVD we had watched countless times, the picture already blurry. Halfway through, I fell asleep leaning against his shoulder, just like in the old days. In a daze, I felt him gently carry me back to the bedroom and plant a kiss on my forehead. On the fifth day, the garden was lit with scented candles. He held that dust-covered guitar. On the sixth day, he played the song from our first date. Terribly out of tune, yet it brought tears to my eyes. On the seventh day, or was it the sixth? The sweet aroma of chocolate wafted from the kitchen. On the eighth day, he clumsily attempted to recreate the handmade chocolates he once gave me when he confessed his feelings. Though it had melted out of shape, I ate them one by one right in front of him. On the seventh night, passing by the study, I heard the muffled sounds of an argument inside. Through the crack in the door, I saw him yelling at the computer, "Get rid of the baby. I'll pay any amount." On the screen, Yvette was crying pitifully. I quietly retreated to the bedroom and took out the divorce papers I had prepared long ago from the dressing table drawer. The 7-day game of love should come to an end now. Nicholas returned to the bedroom and spotted the divorce papers at first glance. He tore them up without hesitation. "Bianca, don't even think about divorce for the rest of your life. I went through hell and high water to marry you, and I'll never let you go." I said, "Nicholas, you will." He roared, "No, I absolutely won't." His voice carried a ruthlessness I'd never heard before, never in this lifetime. Nicholas said he went through hell to marry me, and that wasn't far from the truth. In the depths of winter that year, a thin layer of ice had formed on the flagstones of the Nicholas family's ancestral home. He knelt there, his black overcoat gradually soaked through by the snow. The butler said the young master had been kneeling for 3 days and nights. Even 3 of the old master's beloved purple clay teapots had been smashed in the process. When I brought him the ginger soup, he was receiving the family punishment. The whips in the Nicholas family were specially made, soaked in salt water. 1 lash was enough to make a person tremble in pain. He endured 100 lashes, and in the end, was carried out. The hospital corridor lights were eerily pale. When the doctor issued the critical condition notice, my conscience finally got the better of me, and I knelt on the ground praying for his safety. He had a rare blood type, and with the city's blood banks running critically low, the old man ultimately deployed a military helicopter to transport blood from the neighboring province. Ironically, this marriage born from a life-or-death ultimatum ended up becoming the best PR case for Cheen Company Group. The finance section praised the eldest son Nicholas for his devotion, while the entertainment gossip spun a Cinderella fairy tale. Even the bridal bouquet from our wedding managed to bump the stock price up by 2 points. Later, the old man said to me in the study, "Do you really believe Cinderella and the prince lived happily ever after?" The sandalwood cane tapped against the latest financial report. "Little girl, don't be so naive." I lowered my head to hand the elder a cup of tea. "Grandfather, I was never naive to begin with." At 3 a.m., Nicholas's phone suddenly lit up in the darkness. I squinted my eyes and saw the words assistant flashing repeatedly on the screen. Nicholas, those photos of you and Yvette, they're trending. The voice on the other end of the line was cautious. Nicholas abruptly sat up, the silk sheet sliding off. When he turned to look at me, the moonlight happened to fall on the tense line of his jaw. I pretended to turn over in bed, hearing him walk barefoot out of the bedroom, the door gently closing behind him. He suppressed his anger. Spend however much it takes, everything must be taken down before dawn. His assistant stammered. The other party said, it's not about the money. Then have the platform suspend the account. I contacted a niche platform, but they absolutely refused to cooperate. Listening to the sounds coming through the door crack, I sighed and lay back down to sleep. Yet, a wave of bitterness rose in my heart. I had hoped for an amicable parting, but in the end, I still resorted to tactics against him. At 4 o'clock that morning, Chain Company Group's official public account released a formal statement, official statement. Recently, false information regarding Mr. Nicholas and Ms. Yvette has been circulating online, which was verified to be maliciously fabricated images. We hereby solemnly declare the following regarding the matter. Mr. Nicholas and Ms. Yvette merely maintain a normal professional working relationship. The images circulating online have been professionally verified as fabricated. Evidence preservation has been conducted for the relevant false information, and legal responsibility will be pursued against the rumor mongers in accordance with the law. Chain Company Group has always adhered to the principle of integrity in business operations, resolutely safeguarding the corporate image and the legitimate rights and interests of employees. We sincerely urge netizens not to believe or spread rumors. This statement is hereby issued. The attached images include the scanned copy of the official document bearing the company seal and the image appraisal report issued by a professional institution. Comments section has been placed in featured mode, displaying only officially verified accounts. The group's official website simultaneously updated the statement, featuring a prominent pop-up notice. Less than an hour after Chain Company Group's WeChat public account released the statement. The topic Nicholas Yvette exposed suddenly exploded on Weibo's hot search rankings. In the 9-square photo grid, the image of the two passionately kissing on the private yacht was crystal clear. Even the limited edition Patek Philippe on Nicholas's wrist was captured in perfect detail. It's as if one side refused to admit it, while the other was determined to expose the truth. Would Chain Company Group really dare to pursue the matter? I don't think they would. After all, it's the truth, and deeper scrutiny wouldn't hold up. I stood barefoot on the Persian carpet, watching Nicholas curled up on the sofa. The phone screen was still lit with Yvette's latest message, Nicholas, they're all blaming me. The lock screen wallpaper remained our wedding photo taken in the Maldives. I draped the thin blanket over him, studying his features up close. Mature and steady, no longer the youthful face of his younger days. Early the next morning, the Chain Company Group building was surrounded and completely packed. Reporters raised their cameras and microphones, shouting headlines like "Fairy Tale of the Rich and Powerful Shattered" at the top of their lungs. The media was all waiting for Chain Company Group to give an explanation. After all, the grandeur of my wedding with Nicholas back then was unprecedented. The love story between Cinderella and the prince had captured everyone's attention. The media outlets that once blessed our union now resemble vultures sniffing carrion, poised to feast on this spectacle at any moment. Chain Company Group stocks hit the limit down at market open, yet Nicholas remained indifferent, continuing to play his romantic games with me. For 3 consecutive days, the anonymous disclosures kept coming. Even the detailed timeline of Nicholas and Yvette's affair was laid bare, leaving him visibly haggard. On the 4th day, the shareholders gathered outside the wrought iron gate of the villa. Standing on the spiral staircase, I saw Nicholas by the floor-to-ceiling window, the ashtray overflowing with cigarette butts. In the morning light, his silhouette suddenly seemed a decade older. "Is divorce really necessary?" he asked, his gaze drifting to the slight swell of my belly as he turned. "I told you you'd agree," I murmured softly, looking at his haggard face, a wave of frustration rising within me. He stubbed out his cigarette, his voice filled with exhaustion. "If this is what you want, I agree." I'll have my lawyer draft the agreement. Good. Nicholas held a press conference. Camera flashes flickered like a rainstorm as journalists scrambled to hurl sharp questions. Nicholas, intimate photos of you and Yvette have been circulating across the entire internet. May I ask if you have committed adultery during your marriage? Bianca, how do you view your husband's act of betrayal? Have the two of you already separated? I gently pressed Nicholas's tense arm. With my fingertip, I tapped 3 times on his cufflink. This was our prearranged signal, meaning I'll handle it. After the commotion subsided slightly, I gracefully took the microphone. First of all, I'd like to thank all the media friends for your concern. My voice remained as steady as it had been in previous press conferences. Nicholas and I signed divorce papers 2 years ago, but we chose not to disclose it publicly, considering our business collaboration and shareholder interests. The room immediately erupted in an uproar. Reporters' fingers flew across their keyboards. This news would dominate the internet within minutes. I caught a glimpse of Nicholas clenching his fingers at his side, his knuckles turning white. His eyes were brimming with anger. Yvette had somehow squeezed her way to the front. Today, she was wearing a white dress, looking delicate and pitiful like a fragile little flower. Delight flashed in her eyes, but was quickly replaced by a teary-eyed expression as she quickly stepped forward and took Nicholas's arm. Her voice was sweet. Bianca, you're so considerate. Nicholas and I are truly grateful for your understanding. She added with insinuation, after all, feelings can't be forced, don't you think? Looking at her deliberately naive expression, I curved my lips into a flawless smile. Nicholas and Yvette did start dating after our divorce. Though we've separated, the partnership between calm.Company Group and Albion Ventures won't be affected. I paused briefly, sweeping my gaze across the room. After all, business is business, and personal matters are personal. Yvette suddenly reddened her eyes, delivering an Oscar-worthy performance. Bianca, hearing you say that makes me feel even more guilty. She turned to the media, her voice trembling. Actually, I've always respected Bianca deeply. It's just that matters of the heart. She left her words hanging, perfectly leaving room for imagination. I sneered, what an idiot. Nicholas's face darkened terrifyingly. He abruptly withdrew his arm, his voice icy, not even glancing at Yvette as he said. As Bianca mentioned, we maintain a relationship of mutual respect. Even after the divorce, we remain excellent business partners. The press conference ended in an eerie atmosphere. Afterward, Nicholas was called away by his assistant. Yvette intercepted me backstage, tears still streaking her face, yet her voice dripped with provocation. Bianca, now that the divorce is final, don't ever show your face around Nicholas again. I calmly placed my handbag on the dressing table, leisurely reapplying my lipstick. The truth of the matter, Yvette should know better than I do. I turned to face her, smiling slightly. However, even if Nicholas and I divorce, I won't avoid seeing him. After all, the collaboration project between calm.Company Group and Albion Ventures is worth $2.7 billion. If I don't meet with him, will you be the one to sign the paperwork? Yvette's expression stiffened. I continued, moreover. As I gently caressed my flat stomach. Nicholas is still the father of the child in my womb. I can choose not to see him, but the child can't be without a father, don't you agree? Her expression instantly froze, her meticulously painted eyes widening as if they were about to pop out of their sockets. This can't be true. I elegantly picked up my handbag. Congratulations on your imminent role as Mrs. Nicholas. Stepping out of the lounge, I took a deep breath. The cold air of the underground parking lot hit my face as I walked in my 7-centimeter heels, the sound of my footsteps echoing through the empty space. Why would you say that? Nicholas suddenly rushed over and grabbed my wrist. His voice was low, his eyes brimming with emotions I couldn't decipher. I gently withdrew my hand. The script had long been written, I was supposed to smile gracefully. To say those photos were just crudely photoshopped. To claim it was all a ridiculous misunderstanding. Then, sign the divorce papers when no one was looking. But in the end, I tore up the script. Journalists aren't fools. You and Yvette are indeed together, it won't withstand scrutiny. Regardless, the stock price has stabilized. The outcome is the same, so it doesn't matter. His eyes reddened. Do you really want me and Yvette to be together that badly? I smiled. With so many journalists watching, it's just about going with the flow. His Adam's apple bobbed. You know Yvette and I are only putting on an act, I finished for him, my smile not reaching my eyes. Everyone in the circle does this. Nicholas doesn't need to explain, I understand. If you know everyone in the circle does this, why can't you just? I watched the struggle in his eyes, then turned and got into my car. The driver asked, Bianca, where to? To the office. Sitting in the car, I suddenly remembered how unruffled those society wives appeared when discussing their husbands' mistresses during my first high society dinner party. The shock and confusion back then have now turned into a bitter smile. I thought I could be like them, learning to turn a blind eye. But in the end, I still couldn't do it. The image of Nicholas entangled with another woman makes my heart feel like it's being tightly clenched by an invisible hand, trembling with pain. There's also hatred in my heart. But it's all right. After 2 years of endurance, Albion Ventures no longer needs to rely on Ching Company Group. Those late-night solo revisions of business plans. All those social events where I attended as Mrs. Nicholas finally gave me the confidence for a clean exit. Ching Company Group stock price has finally stabilized. The media kept hyping Yvette's high-profile appearance 4 days. The outside world clearly didn't fully buy our story about Nicholas and me having divorced long ago. Financial reporters are analyzing stock price fluctuations, while the entertainment section is still speculating. The so-called divorce 2 years ago was merely a PR tactic to cover up Nicholas's infidelity. After all, our marriage once shocked the entire industry, yet the divorce went unnoticed, utterly illogical. If Yvette were smart enough, she should stay silent. The parties involved have already clarified, and the platform has issued an apology statement, admitting the images were photoshopped. Reporters lack hard evidence, at most they'll write a few speculative articles. Yet she chose to put on that clumsy act right at the press conference. Red-eyed, clinging to Nicholas's arm, verbally saying I respect Bianca while her eyes brimmed with triumph. The outcome was predictable. Labels like green tea bitch, white lotus, and scheming mistress instantly flooded the internet. Netizens even dug up old photos of her mingling in wealthy social circles years ago. Different parties, similar white dresses, identical delicate postures. Her social media accounts were completely flooded, and Nicholas' public image suffered collateral damage. After all, our extravagant wedding made headlines across the city back then, yet it's ending this way, inevitably evoking sighs of regret. I sat in the office, watching news alerts pop up one after another, and couldn't help but sneer. Some people just can't quietly stay invisible, they have to jump out and humiliate themselves. On the day the divorce agreement was signed, sunlight poured through the law firm's floor-to-ceiling windows, casting a warm glow on my rounded belly. The terms Nicholas offered were far more generous than I had imagined. He transferred all his fixed assets under his name to me. Even promised to transfer 15% of his shares to the child once it's born. By the time the lawyer read the final clause, my fingers were unconsciously brushing the edges of the paper. This was 3 times thicker than the divorce agreement I had prepared for him. Even the marital villa we currently live in was left entirely to me. The butler said Nicholas specifically instructed to keep all the furniture and decorations unchanged, to avoid any discomfort for the pregnant woman. Gazing at the starry sky lamp he personally installed in the master bedroom, I suddenly realized this man truly loved me once. I never believed Cinderella would live happily ever after with her prince. Reality has proven me right. During the 5 years of marriage, I was never like the naive and innocent heroines in novels. Stop hoping for a man's undivided love, but use that tiny bit of affection to finally achieve a class leap. I packed all his belongings and had my assistant deliver them to his new villa that same day. Unexpectedly, that very afternoon, his personal assistant arrived with a fleet of cars and rang the doorbell. 3 business vehicles were packed full of baby supplies. A German-made anti-colic thermostatic baby bottle, Swiss customized pure cotton swaddling clothes. Even the cedar-scented aroma in the nursery was chosen to match my usual preference. The assistant hesitated while handing me the delivery receipt. Nicholas said, "If you don't like these styles, thank him for me." I signed my name briskly, suddenly recalling how he had taught me to sign contracts the year we got married. Back then, he held my hand and said, "Press down firmly. Now my signature can pierce through the paper." After the divorce, I became a legend in the Heischer business district. The society ladies who once looked down on my humble origins now compete to invite me to charity auctions. The profit-sharing agreement with Cheen Company Group, offering a 20% discount, doubled my company's valuation in just 3 months. On the day I signed the multinational order, I donated to every orphanage in the city. When the director held my hand and said, "You've finally put my mind at ease," my gaze remained unmoving upon recognizing the familiar Nicholas signature on the donor list. At 8 months pregnant, I still attended the tech summit. Beneath the crystal chandeliers, I held my belly and raised my glass with effortless grace. Richard, who once mocked me as the orphan who climbed her way to the top, was now smiling obsequiously as he toasted me. Bianca is truly a heroine among women, still striving for her career even on the verge of childbirth. Compared to Richard's legendary feat of negotiating deals within 4 drip, this is nothing. I turned with my pomegranate juice in hand and found myself staring into a pair of profound eyes. Nicholas stood 3 steps away, his navy blue tie knotted in a Windsor below his Adam's apple. It was the gift I gave him for his birthday last year. His gaze drifted from my swollen belly to my face. His Adam's apple bobbed before he simply raised his glass in silent acknowledgement. The waiter accidentally bumped into me, and he rushed over faster than the bodyguards. The fingers supporting my elbow were warm and dry, with our former wedding ring still on his ring finger. "Be careful," he said. These were the first words we exchanged after the divorce. I told Yvette I would keep in touch with Nicholas. In truth, I avoided meeting him whenever possible. Let my assistant handle any matters. I smiled in gratitude, turned away from Nicholas, and continued mingling effortlessly among the guests. When Yvette appeared, the entire banquet hall seemed to quiet down for a moment. She walked in on stiletto heels, wearing a well-tailored red evening gown with striking crimson lips, her gaze piercing straight at me. "Bianca, long time no see." She smiled radiantly, but her voice was cold as ice. "Pushing yourself so hard while pregnant, truly admirable." Noticing her flat stomach, I curled a smile at the corner of my mouth. On the day we got our divorce certificate, I opened that unfamiliar numbers chat window right in front of Nicholas. I deleted those explicit photos one by one right in front of him. The effect was perfect. Nicholas's assets can only belong to the child in my womb. I swirled the pomegranate juice in my hand, curling my lips slightly. "You're too kind, Yvette." She suddenly took a step forward, her high heels clicking sharply against the marble floor. "However, if something doesn't belong to you, don't even think about it." The surrounding chatter gradually quieted down, with everyone's gaze subtly turning toward us. Although we held a press conference, it could only fool outsiders. Who in the circle doesn't know about the relationship between the 3 of us? I slightly tilted my head, feigning confusion. "What does Yvette refer to?" She let out a cold laugh, deliberately raising her voice. "Nicholas's company offered you a 20% discount, delivers baby essentials and prenatal supplements every month, and even for every prenatal checkup." She paused, her red lips curling into a sneer. He waited in the hospital corridor until it was over. The banquet hall fell completely silent. I gently stroked my belly and looked up at her. "So what?" "So," she seemed provoked by my calmness, her voice suddenly turning sharp. "You knew everything, yet you didn't stop it. You accepted it willingly. Even after divorcing, you still seduced him." I let out a soft laugh. Though my pregnant belly made my movements somewhat slow, it didn't stop me from looking down at her with absolute superiority. "Yvette, the reason Nicholas won't marry you is that he never loved you to begin with." Her expression froze. I leisurely adjusted my shawl. You've been by his side for so long, yet you can't even get a proper title. It's truly pitiful when you think about it. Her nails dug deeply into her palms, and her meticulously made-up face twisted slightly. You think you've won? He's just pitying you. You're just relying on the child in your belly, but who knows if that child isn't some bastard. Seeing her frenzied gaze, I instinctively protected my swollen belly. I think Yvette has gone mad, as if she might lunge at me any moment. I squinted, scanning my surroundings. If she were to go berserk, how should I protect myself? Yvette. A deep, cold male voice sounded from behind her. Nicholas stood behind her at some point, his eyes cold and stern, the air around him chillingly oppressive. I heaved a deep sigh of relief. Thank goodness, thank goodness. Yvette spun around abruptly, her expression shifting from malice to tremulous fear. Nicholas, I was just. Who gave you permission to be here? Get out. His voice was quiet, yet it sent a shiver through everyone in the banquet hall. Yvette's face turned pale instantly. Can't you see even a little? I said. Nicholas enunciated each word slowly. Get out. His assistant immediately stepped forward and politely but firmly escorted Yvette out. The banquet hall fell into complete silence. Nicholas's gaze settled on me, his Adam's apple bobbing slightly before he finally murmured, "Let me take you home." I smiled and shook my head. No need, Nicholas. As I turned to leave, I heard him ask from behind, "Can I be there when you give birth?" Sure. I didn't turn back. After all, this is also your child. You'll always protect them. I didn't look at the starlight shimmering in his eyes. I only knew that I would likely achieve my goal very soon. The next day, my assistant reported that Yvette had been sent away. The kind where she could never even think of coming back. With a faint smile on my lips, I said, "Go and inform Nicholas that in 20 days, I will have a direct C-section." Holding on and keeping in touch, that's exactly how it should be. On the bench outside the delivery room, Nicholas's suit was crumpled beyond recognition. When the nurse came out holding the crying baby, this decisive man, usually so formidable in the business world, actually staggered. Twins, both healthy. He trembled as he took the swaddled bundle, his tears falling onto the baby's little wrinkled red faces. Lying on the stretcher, I looked at him and suddenly remembered that snowy night 5 years ago. He knelt in the ancestral home of Nicholas, begging the old man to agree to his marriage with me, with the same scalding tears. "Let's do a paternity test," I said hoarsely as the anesthesia wore off. He shook his head, his thumb gently brushing the corner of my eye. "I believe you." But I still had my assistant deliver the sample. The child truly wasn't conceived through intimacy between us. It was from the year we were most in love, when he had his sperm frozen. And as his wife, I had every legal right to access it. The day the report came out, Nicholas evenly divided 15% of his shares between both children. Victor also sent lavish gifts. The old man who once said I wasn't good enough for his grandson now wrote a check with no shortage of zeros. "You really surprised me," he said, glancing at the crib before leaving. And I watched the 2 little ones with a peaceful smile. Both children are mine, and after the divorce, I secured so many benefits for them. Look, isn't your mom amazing? After the baby was born, my relationship with Nicholas seemed to ease up. Nicholas started appearing frequently at the villa. Sometimes he'd bring Swiss-crafted baby rattles. Other times, he would just sit quietly by the cradle while working. Yvette became like pencil marks erased by rubber, never mentioned again. When our child turned 3, Nicholas said, "Bianca, let's remarry." I shook my head. "I think things are perfect between us this way. At least we're free." After Nicholas's proposal for remarriage was rejected, he never brought it up again. Instead, he bought the villa next to Bianca's. Standing by the floor-to-ceiling window on the 3rd floor, he watched Bianca basking in the sun with the child in her arms in the backyard. Suddenly, he realized she was right, this was just as good. At least he could watch Bianca raise the children with smiles on her face. He loved Bianca, to the marrow of his bones, even willing to give up his life for her. But their circle was like a deep, murky pool where even the clearest minds would be tainted. He thought he could hold his ground, but on a drunken night, he was bewitched by Yvette's perfume. Those photos were taken with such clarity. On the day we got our marriage certificate, Bianca deleted those photos of strangers right in front of him. No wonder he thought his secrecy was foolproof. There was never a night away from home without reason, nor did he ever neglect his wife. He knew very well that the women outside were just playthings. Only Bianca at home was the true haven for his soul. He saw those photos. Only then did he realize how foolish he had been. He underestimated a woman's determination to rise to the top. That day, he grabbed her by the neck and pinned her against the wall. "Didn't I tell you some lines should never be crossed?" Yvette's face turned red with struggle. "You and Bianca are already divorced. I'm carrying your... just a bastard." He released his grip and leisurely wiped his fingertips with a handkerchief. "Tomorrow at 10 o'clock, Renha Hospital." Later, I heard there was heavy bleeding on the operating table, and she could never bear children again. At that moment, he was in a board meeting. The pen hesitated for half a second before continuing to sign its name across the merger documents. That very night, the lead surgeon's account received a 7-figure deposit. A woman who can't bear children, keeping her around is just a waste. Yet, who would have thought she would have the courage to seek out Bianca? Yvette was sent away by him. She can forget about ever coming back. The floor-to-ceiling window reflected his solitary figure as the red wine swirled in his glass. In this circle, everyone longs for genuine feelings, yet they are the best at trampling on them. He once thought he would be the exception, but ultimately became the most cliché kind of person. He downed his drink with a bitter smile. All of this was entirely his own doing. My new boyfriend Gavin is a 185 cm tall model. He loves strutting around the villa in the designer shirts I gave him, his 8-pack abs faintly visible, clingy like a big puppy. "Sis, can you come with me to the art exhibition today?" He rested his chin on my shoulder, his eyelashes glinting golden in the sunlight. I knew he was after my black card, just as I was after his eternally vibrant enthusiasm and perfectly measured jealousy. The day Nicholas ran into Gavin, my young boyfriend was squatting in the garden tying my shoelaces. I looked up and met Nicholas's gaze, the Lego sets he had bought for the kids slipping from his hands with a sharp thud. For a whole week, Cheen Company Group has snatched 3 projects from me in a row. The smoke of the business battlefield spread into our home, even our daughter looked up and asked, "Mommy, why did Daddy throw away the doll Gavin gave me?" I gently stroked my daughter's soft hair and smiled. Nicholas probably is still living in that self-deceiving dream, believing that even if we don't remarry. But it can't go on like this. You still refuse to believe that our divorce was the result of my carefully calculated scheme. Last night, while sorting through old belongings, I came across the photo of Nicholas kneeling on the cruise ship to propose to me all those years ago. It reminded me of how his back, stained with blood in the snowfield, looked as striking as red plum blossoms. Looking back now, was I moved back then? Deeply so. Shaken. Heartbroken. And utterly willing. Gavin wrapped his arms around me from behind. "What are you looking at, sis?" His warm breath brushed against my earlobe, his youthful body radiating vibrant energy. I closed the photo album and suddenly realized that Nicholas, who once made my heart flutter in my memories, had blurred into obscurity like a faded old photograph. Outside the floor-to-ceiling window, Nicholas's car had once again been parked by the roadside all night. Should I invite him in? Gavin handed me a cup of warm milk. I drew the curtains. No need. On my 40th birthday, I had my lawyer deliver the breakup agreement to Gavin's apartment. When he barged into my office, he was still wearing the limited edition suit I had gifted him, his tie askew, looking like an abandoned large dog. "Sister, where did I go wrong?" His eyes were red, and the 30-year-old man cried with the same boyish grievance. Sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating his meticulously sculpted abs. Suddenly, I remembered that fashion show 10 years ago. It was the same gaze that made me stop in my tracks. I pushed the financial reports aside and gestured for him to sit. You've done well. The pen tapped lightly on the agreement. The villa in Songjiang is yours, and you're already used to driving that Aston Martin in the garage. He grabbed my hand suddenly. I don't want any of this. I pulled my hand back. Don't be naive. Didn't you get close to me just for these things in the first place? Gavin finally signed the agreement, his pen strokes forceful enough to rip through the paper. As he stood at the door before leaving, his voice hoarse, he said, "At least tell me why." I swiveled my office chair to gaze out the window. The sky at 40 looked no different than it did at 30. All those intimate late-night moments were, in the end, nothing more than a transaction of mutual benefit. I'm done with this, I said. The snow fell heavier, quickly burying the footprints of his departure. The next day, Qin Company Group extended a collaboration offer. I flipped open the proposal, where beside Nicholas' bold signature was a tiny drawn heart. This man in his 40s still retained such a childish habit. My phone vibrated. Nicholas had sent a message. I heard you broke up. Maybe you could reconsider me now? I scoffed. Men were truly ridiculous. They let go so easily, and yet pursue so desperately afterwards. Younger flesh is waiting for me, why should I settle for an old man? I replied, you're just my children's father.